Succulents have this amazing ability to multiply and create clusters. It is one of the ways these plants reproduce and grow. The great thing about succulent clusters is that they can be separated in order to create more, but not all succulent clusters are created the same. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to separate different types of succulent clusters, how to plant and care for them, as well as discuss whether it's better to separate or leave them intact. Before we get into how, I'd like to look at the why along with the pros and cons. You may want to separate clusters for a couple of reasons. One is to grow more. A mature cluster can sometimes produce upwards of 10 offsets, and these are all potential new plants that will in time grow clusters of their own. These can then be used to create gorgeous mass succulent plantings in the garden to grow in pretty pots, or in my case to sell. Another reason is to free up space. Clusters can sometimes take over and smother smaller plants. By separating them and taking out the offsets, you can create space in arrangements or gardens and keep them looking neat. The third reason is to free up energy for the mother plant. Growing as a cluster can affect how the plant looks and how big it gets. Single succulents on their own can grow much bigger than clusters. It takes a lot more energy to maintain a cluster, especially when they grow in pots. For clusters to grow well, larger pots or frequent repotting is a must, otherwise they are very likely to grow root bound and can start losing leaves, growing smaller and even eventually die. But when they're maintained, clusters can look stunning. Especially when different cluster-forming succulents are planted together and allowed to mingle. Succulent clusters can be very different between species, and so we're going to separate a variety of plants. Some succulents grow very tight clusters that may be hard to separate, while others are super easy to just pull apart. Because cacti are succulents too, I thought we'll do one prickly cluster as well. There are a few rules to follow when pulling succulents apart that will apply to all of them. One such rule is to only separate clusters during the plant's growing season, which is usually spring, summer or early autumn. The reason behind this is that the separated succulents will have hard time growing out of their growing season when they are dormant and may die, especially if they won't have any roots. With tight clusters like this, the easiest way to pull the individual heads apart is to remove the whole thing out of the pot. This way you'll gain access to the stalk. Generally, when you can grab hold of the stalks, the heads will come away better. Try not to pull by the rosettes, as you can break them in a way that will make the leaves just fall apart in your hand, completely ruining the particular rosette. Here I managed to find a good stalk and pull the first rosette off. Once you get the first one out of the way, the rest will be much easier. When pulling clusters apart, it is very likely you'll also pull a few roots away, which is a good thing, and it will help the plants establish faster and better. Another option to separate clusters like this is to cut with scissors rather than pull. This method will also work, and the cutting will eventually grow roots. But you are likely to miss out on the roots the offset has already grown, and it will take longer to establish. In my opinion, if you can pull easily, try and do that before cutting. Clusters are also likely to have a few dead leaves at the bottom. This is quite normal and nothing to worry about. When succulents grow close together and leaves are pushing against each other, they are likely to first go yellow, then brown and eventually dry. Do clean them off though. They can sometimes be used by mealybugs as an egg-laying spot. It's quite possible some of the rosettes will not yet have roots developed, or they break off when separating. It is nothing to worry about, as succulents can handle this and will send roots down in about 2 to 3 weeks. The first plant is done, and one cluster became 7 separate rosettes. Next up is the Sedum clavatum cluster. There's quite a few little rosettes growing here, but I'm only going to take the biggest ones. This plant can be pulled apart, but I prefer to separate the rosettes by cutting them off. The reason is that this particular plant has got stalks that break easily, so when you attempt to pull, it tends to break and can damage the surrounding rosettes. It is, however, a fairly minor annoyance and my personal preference, so if you want to try pulling, you can. Taking the biggest rosettes is also a preference, as Sedum clavatum will grow even from the smallest offsets, but bigger ones grow better, faster and are more resilient if an unexpected hot day comes along. Tiny cuttings will always be a bit more vulnerable, and it is my opinion that letting them grow bigger before separating is better. If you find leaves, put them aside, they will grow leaf babies. Another useful thing to know is that mature clusters with larger offsets separate a lot easier than small ones with tiny babies. This Haworthia cymbiformis has pushed all of its offsets away, and now pretty much all of them are growing as a separate plant, though some are still attached to the mother rosette. Look how easy it is to take them off. All of these pups also have roots, so they will establish really fast. I'm only going to take a few, as otherwise we'll be here all day, but I'm sure you get the gist of it. This double Echeveria Lola head can be a little hard to separate just by pulling. I'll try to force them gently, and if that doesn't work, I'll use a Stanley knife to make a small cup to help them divide. Again, make sure you're pulling by the stalk so the leaves don't get damaged. Well, I didn't expect them to break apart so easily. It's always good to try first but not force it if there's too much resistance. Next, I'll clean off all those dead leaves and make sure there's no nasties hiding in them. Echeveria albicans can grow super tight when clusters develop, so once again I'll take the whole thing out of the pot and gently try what will work best. I managed to separate the first offset without too much trouble. The next pup is giving me a bit of resistance, so I'll use a Stanley knife to help it separate. With clusters this tight, a Stanley knife will cause minimal damage with its thin blade. Scissors or garden shears could damage too many leaves. And that's another one done. Saving the best for last, cacti, especially the super prickly varieties, can quite literally be a pain to pull apart. Although this Rebutia is not that bad, I'm still putting gloves on, as little spines are very irritating and hard to see when they go through the skin. The good news about cluster forming cacti is that they are usually easy to pull apart. After separating, leave the offsets for a minimum of 24 hours in a dry spot so the wound created by the cut heals. This should prevent any unwanted bacteria or fungus to get into the plant. The newly separated clusters can be then planted into trays, pots, yogurt tubs or whatever other container you have spare. I'll be planting the offsets without roots into a propagating tray and those with roots into individual pots. To help anchor the rootless offsets, create a hole for the stalk. This will help them from falling out or getting blown away by the wind. Once done, place them in a bright spot, preferably with morning sun followed by afternoon shade or under shade cloth. Strong sun, especially in summer, can easily burn new offsets, and it is best to keep them a bit protected until they establish. I would also recommend watering the offsets regularly until they establish, but do let the potting mix dry out between waterings. These bigger offsets with root balls can go into pots or in the garden. I'm using good quality succulent potting mix for pretty much everything. Start off with smaller pots and then repot once the plant gets root bound. Personally, I don't like bunging succulents in big pots straight off the bat, as the potting mix can waste away and nutrients degrade and get washed out over time. It's much better to repot periodically. And that's it for today. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have anything to add to this video or would like to ask a question, you can leave a comment below. To learn more about succulents, hit the subscribe button or go to succulentgrowingtips.com. Thank you very much for watching.